When we talk about friendship, we often carry with us a lifelong script. That friends are essential, that our worth is reflected in how many people sit around our table, that loneliness is the enemy we must fight with companionship at all costs. And yet, something begins to shift after 70. The seasons of life change, and with it comes a new invitation, not to gather more people around us, but to turn inward, to embrace independence, and to find happiness that isn't dependent on who calls us, who visits us, or who remembers our birthdays. Independence after 70 brings peace by releasing the pressure to perform, please, or maintain unnecessary friendships. And this realization is both liberating and healing in ways that younger generations often cannot yet understand. For much of life, there is an unspoken demand that we fit in, that we show up for others even when we are exhausted, that we keep conversations going so people won't misinterpret our silence, that we give parts of ourselves to keep the bonds of friendship alive. It begins early when we are children in school, trying to sit with the right group at lunch, and it continues into adulthood as we learn how to navigate relationships at work, with neighbors, in social circles, and in communities. That constant negotiation can be draining. We bend our preferences and sometimes even our values to maintain a sense of belonging. By the time we reach 70, many of us have decades of experience carrying those expectations, and the weight can feel heavier than ever. But something beautiful happens with age. The need to prove ourselves to others fades, and in its place comes a calm acceptance that our lives do not have to revolve around pleasing or performing for anyone else. This peace comes not from shutting people out, but from stepping into authenticity. When you no longer feel the obligation to maintain friendships that no longer nourish you, you find yourself free from the guilt that used to accompany letting go. So many older adults stay tethered to relationships out of habit rather than joy. They keep answering the phone calls, showing up at the lunches, tolerating conversations that drain them simply because they believe they are supposed to. But at 70, there is a newfound clarity that whispers, you have earned the right to choose peace over obligation. That whisper becomes stronger the more you listen to it until it turns into the truth. You carry with confidence. You do not have to keep friendships that ask you to be smaller than who you are. The performance of friendship is another layer that often goes unspoken. How often have we smiled at jokes that were not funny, agreed with opinions we did not hold, or extended help we did not have the energy to give? These performances may have served a purpose in earlier years, helping us climb ladders, build networks, or keep harmony in groups. But after 70, the audience disappears. No one is keeping score anymore. The currency of approval loses its value, and you realize that you do not need applause to validate your existence. You have lived enough life, loved enough people, and carried enough burdens to finally step away from the stage. Independence means no longer performing for others' comfort, but instead living in a way that feels honest, even if that honesty is quiet solitude. People often confuse independence with loneliness, but the two are vastly different. Loneliness is what you feel when you are surrounded by people who do not see you, who expect you to perform a version of yourself that is not authentic. Independence is the opposite. It is the removal of that mask. It is the freedom to decline invitations without guilt, the courage to sit at home in your favorite chair without worrying if anyone thinks you're being antisocial, the strength to let friendships fade if they no longer serve your heart. And in that freedom, a remarkable peace begins to settle in. It is a peace that comes from knowing you are no longer beholden to external demands, and that your worth is not tied to how many people gather around you. There is also a deep sense of relief in not having to please anyone anymore. For much of life, people-pleasing becomes a default mode, particularly for those who were taught to prioritize others' needs over their own. We say yes when we want to say no. We host gatherings when our bodies ache for rest. We keep listening to complaints when our spirits crave quiet. But after 70, you have the gift of perspective. You have weathered storms, faced losses, celebrated victories, and endured disappointments. The urgency to be liked softens, and what replaces it is the desire to be at peace. Pleasing yourself for perhaps the first time in decades becomes enough. You learn that you can choose what feels right without the need to explain, justify, or apologize. There is healing in this independence. It allows old wounds to close and old resentments to dissolve, because the pressure pressure that caused them in the first place is gone. Imagine a life where you are no longer rushing to meet expectations, no longer rehearsing polite small talk, no longer pushing yourself to attend events you dread. Imagine the lightness of waking up and knowing the only approval you need is your own. That is the gift of independence after 70. It is not about shutting people out, but about opening space for yourself to exist fully and freely. This shift also changes how you see the friendships you do choose to keep. Without pressure, the relationships that remain feel easier, lighter, more authentic. When you no longer feel the need to perform or please, the people who stay in your life are those who truly love you as you are. You are no longer bound to unnecessary friendships, and in that way you experience more genuine connection, not less. Independence strips away the noise and reveals the relationships that are rooted in truth rather than obligation. In the end, independence after 70 is not about isolation, but about liberation. It is about recognizing that you have given enough of yourself to others and that you now deserve to reclaim your time, your energy, and your spirit. By releasing the pressure to perform, please, or maintain unnecessary friendships, you make room for peace to enter, and that peace is a gift only age can fully teach. True happiness comes from self-companionship, clarity, and freedom rather than relying on others for validation. And this realization often arrives more clearly with age. For so much of life, we are taught that our joy depends on the company we keep, on the approval of friends, on the affirmation that comes from being included. We are taught to measure our days by how many calls we received, how many invitations were extended, and how often people sought our presence. While companionship can be a blessing, it is not the foundation of true contentment. After 70, when many of the demands of career, parenting, and social climbing have fallen away, a new truth becomes visible, that happiness is an inside job and it is sustained by the relationship we have with ourselves. Self-companionship is not about rejecting others. It is about embracing the fullness of who we are without needing constant reinforcement. There is a quiet strength in waking up and knowing that your joy is not dependent on someone else's smile, text, or approval. It is learning how to sit with your own thoughts and finding them not burdensome, but enriching. It is choosing to take a walk alone and discovering that the sound of your footsteps and the rhythm of your breath can be as comforting as any conversation. This is a kind of companionship that grows richer with age because it comes from a deep well of lived experiences, from knowing your own history, and from appreciating the resilience that has carried you through decades of life. Clarity also becomes a central part of happiness after 70. When you no longer depend on external validation, your vision sharpens. You begin to see what truly matters and what does not. The noise of comparison begins to fade. You no longer weigh your joy against someone else's possessions, accomplishments, or friendships. Instead, you find clarity in simplicity. In the way sunlight filters through your window, in the way a home-cooked meal nourishes your body, in the way a quiet evening feels more satisfying than a crowded party ever did. This clarity makes life lighter. You no longer carry the burden of trying to keep up with others. You recognize that happiness has always been about the little things, and only when the need for external validation is released do those little things shine as brightly as they should. Freedom is the third pillar of this kind of happiness, and it is perhaps the sweetest reward of age. The freedom to say no without guilt, to decline social obligations without fear of judgment, to live at your own pace without needing to apologize. This freedom allows you to design your life in a way that nourishes your spirit instead of draining it. When you are younger, freedom often feels tied to rebellion, to pushing against expectations. But after 70, freedom feels different. It feels like alignment. It feels like finally having permission to be who you have always wanted to be without worrying about who understands. There is a peace that comes with knowing that you do not need to prove your worth because your worth was never dependent on others in the first place. Depending on others for validation is like standing on shifting ground. When people are present, when they praise you, when they affirm you, you feel steady. But when they disappear, when they criticize, when they forget you, the ground shakes beneath you. Building happiness on self-companionship, clarity, and freedom is like standing on solid rock. It does not change when people come and go. It is not shaken by the weather of others' opinions. It remains steady because it comes from within. This does not mean you do not enjoy people's company or appreciate their kindness, but it means that their presence or absence does not dictate your peace. In many ways, this understanding is a return to self. It is remembering that long before we had friends, colleagues, or social circles, we had ourselves. As children, we knew how to entertain ourselves, how to create joy from imagination, how to find delight in our own company. Over the years, life layered expectations on top of that simple truth, and we were led to believe that solitude was something to fear. But with age, those layers begin to peel away, and the childlike joy of being with oneself reemerges. There is a tenderness in caring for yourself the way you once cared for others, in listening to your own needs with patience, in honoring your own heart without demanding that someone else validate it first. The culture we live in often glorifies busyness, popularity, and constant connection, making it difficult to see the beauty in independence. But as the years pass, it becomes clearer that the happiest people are not always the ones surrounded by the largest crowds. They are often the ones who have learned how to enjoy their own company, how to live slowly and intentionally, how to let go of comparison, and how to embrace freedom. True happiness after 70 is not measured by how many names are in your phone or how many people show up at your door. It is measured by how full your heart feels in the quiet moments, how peaceful your mind feels when you wake, and how content your soul feels when you rest at night. When self-companionship, clarity, and freedom guide your life, there is no longer a hunger for validation. There is instead a deep satisfaction that radiates from within. You no longer wait for others to remind you that you matter. You know you do. You no longer chase after approval. You give it to yourself. You no longer fear solitude. You welcome it as an old friend. And in that space, true happiness becomes not something you seek, but something you naturally carry with you. Embracing solitude allows you to live authentically without comparison and fully on your own terms. And this is one of the greatest gifts that life after 70 offers. Throughout much of life, there is a constant tug of war between who we truly are and who we think we must be in order to belong. We spend years adjusting ourselves, smoothing out edges, biting back words, and shaping our choices based on how we will be perceived. That pressure to compare and conform can be exhausting, but with age comes a shift. Solitude becomes less of something to avoid and more of something to embrace because it opens the door to a kind of authenticity that no crowd, no social circle, and no approval can give. Living authentically means allowing yourself to express what is real, not what is expected. When you are no longer surrounded by the noise of constant social obligation, you begin to notice your own voice more clearly. In solitude, you hear your thoughts without interruption, and those thoughts reveal what truly matters to you. Maybe it is the joy of sitting in your garden and listening to birds, or the satisfaction of cooking your favorite meal even if no one else will share it, or the delight of wearing clothes that make you feel comfortable without worrying if they are in fashion. These small personal choices are what authenticity looks like in daily life. They are not shaped by the comparison of what others are doing, but by the quiet knowledge of what feels right for you. Comparison has always been one of the hidden thieves of joy. It begins early when we compare our grades, our homes, our children, our jobs, and later our health, our energy, and even our friendships. There is always someone who seems to be doing more, having more, living more. And as long as we measure ourselves against others, happiness feels just out of reach. Solitude, however, interrupts this cycle. When you are alone, there is no one to compare yourself to. You are not distracted by what others have or what they appear to be doing. You are simply with yourself, and in that stillness, you begin to see that your life does not need to look like anyone else's to be worthy. The absence of comparison creates space for gratitude, and gratitude in turn strengthens authenticity. Living on your own terms is perhaps the most powerful part of embracing solitude. It means you can create routines that suit your energy rather than the demands of others. You can decide to rise with the sun or sleep until it feels right, to eat when you are hungry rather than when a schedule dictates, to spend time on hobbies that give you joy instead of filling your days with obligations. This kind of autonomy is deeply satisfying because it is rooted in choice. For many years, much of life is dictated by responsibilities to others, raising families, working jobs, maintaining social ties. By 70, many of those responsibilities shift or fall away, leaving you with the freedom to decide what your days will look like. Solitude gives you the canvas, and authenticity allows you to paint it in colors that are entirely your own. It is important to understand that solitude is not the same as isolation. Isolation is the absence of connection, often accompanied by sadness or longing. Solitude, on the other hand, is the presence of yourself in your own life. It is a conscious choice to step into quiet and to fill that quiet with things that nourish you. In solitude, you are not empty. You are full of your own presence. You discover that you do not need a constant stream of voices to validate your existence. You realize that being alone does not mean being unloved, but rather being deeply at peace with who you are. There is also an element of courage in embracing solitude. For much of life, many people fear being alone because it forces them to face themselves. It strips away distraction and exposes truths we sometimes avoid. But at 70, courage has already been tested through countless experiences, through loss, through change, through both hardship and joy. That courage now allows you to sit with yourself honestly without fear. And in doing so, you uncover a kind of freedom that is rare. You are no longer afraid of your own company, and that lack of fear becomes a foundation for authenticity. Living without comparison also means celebrating your life exactly as it is. Maybe your health looks different than it did 20 years ago. Maybe your circle of people is smaller. Maybe your energy is not the same. But none of those realities diminish your worth. In solitude, you learn to stop measuring your present against your past or against someone else's present. You begin to notice the richness in the details, the way your hands, though aged, still create comfort and carry meaning. The way your experiences, even the painful ones, have carved wisdom into your story. The way your presence, quiet though it may be, still carries weight. Without comparison, these truths shine more clearly, and they allow you to embrace life without resentment. There is a deep dignity in reaching the point where you no longer need to prove yourself. Solitude teaches you that dignity is not about recognition, but about living aligned with your own truth. It is about resting when you are tired without apology, speaking when you have something to say without hesitation, and creating joy in your life without waiting for someone else to offer it. When you live on your own terms, guided by authenticity and free from comparison, you no longer fear missing out because you understand that what you have is enough. Embracing solitude after 70 is not about stepping away from life, but about stepping more fully into it. It is about realizing that you no longer need the noise of external approval to feel whole because you already are. It is about claiming the space to be who you are without compromise. And in that space, discovering that life is not only simpler, but more beautiful when lived authentically, without comparison, and fully on your own terms. When we look at life after 70 through the lens of independence, a pattern emerges: peace, self-companionship, clarity, freedom, authenticity, and the release of comparison. What once felt like loss, the loosening of friendships, the quieting of social obligations, becomes a gift when seen differently. It is not about rejecting people, but about finally stepping into the kind of living that honors your soul rather than exhausts it. By letting go of the pressure to perform for others, by learning to find happiness within yourself, and by embracing solitude as a path to authenticity, you arrive at a place where life is no longer dictated by outside voices. It becomes your own, entirely and unapologetically. The beauty of this stage is that you no longer have to prove anything to anyone. You simply get to live in the fullness of who you are on your own terms, carrying peace and freedom into every day that remains.